My favorite thing about PragerU is that I'm not especially good at baseball. But these cats like to toss me softballs, and it makes me feel like a real sports legend. Today we'll be discussing a real neat video by Prager University on toxic masculinity. But not really, it's just a string of loosely connected phrases that mean nothing. I'm Comrade Faust, and this is the SJLA. So I should start this off by saying I'm only kind of a man. I'm a man in the way that a Coke Zero is a Diet Pepsi. To continue the sports metaphor, you'd put a real nice little asterisk next to man in the record books. I'm not injecting steroids, I'm just non-binary. These muscles are all natural, baby, all natural. But to PragerU, I don't think the difference is all that meaningful.
Do you think the people who you know who are on the spectrum would see Mr. Potato Head just as it is and be offended by it themselves?
As such, I'm plenty qualified to talk about men and masculinity, so I will. My very best friend, Ali Stuckey, gets us off to a great start by giving us not a definition of toxic masculinity, but examples. Rape, murder, war. They all have one thing in common. Men. The fact is, she never does define what toxic masculinity is, which great move by her. It really helps to prove her point by letting you fill in the blank however you want. But don't you worry, Allie, I got you on this one. Toxic masculinity is, broadly speaking, attitudes and behaviors associated with men and masculine people that are harmful, negative, or destructive to the individual or to society. But hey, toxic masculinity does sound bad. I bet people have a plan for combating it, and boy howdy, I hope Allie tells me what that plan is.
The solution is obvious. Make men less toxic. Make men less masculine. Make men more like women.
I'm not certain that is the formulated plan, nor has it ever been the formulated plan. One quick tip is the presence of the adjective toxic, which modifies the noun masculinity. So any condemnation of toxic masculinity would not condemn all forms of masculinity, because the addition of the word toxic necessarily excludes all forms of masculinity that are not toxic. Right off the bat, Ali is introducing us to an enemy that does not exist. An enemy that isn't even clearly defined. Ali, you have got to work on clarity. What does it mean to act more like a woman, as opposed to more like a man? And PragerU hardly even stands by this argument. They insist we're trying to create more men.
Many promise that if you start a course of testosterone, all of your problems will go away.
Let's move on. This way of thinking is clearly wrong, but I bet she won't say it's dangerous.
That way of thinking is not only wrong, it's dangerous.
Why?
Here's why. When you try to make men more like women, you don't get less toxic masculinity. You get more.
Why?
Because bad men don't become good when they stop being men. They become good when they stop being bad.
Oh, that's real neat. I never thought of it that way. Bad people are bad when they're bad, and good people are good when they're good. Cool insight. I never thought about it that way before. Let's break this down. We have the imaginary problem of men being forced to act like women, and again, she never clarifies what that actually means. But through this process of feminization, men become more toxic, and this claim is supported by saying bad people are bad when they do bad things. It's impossible to argue with that logic, not because it's sound logic, but because it means nothing. Now, I concede forcing someone to act counter to their gender identity is harmful. That's one of those things that cause that gender dysphoria. It'll make someone depressed, but I don't think it'll increase any sort of toxic masculinity.
Aggression, violence, and unbridled ambition can't be eliminated from the male psyche. They can only be harnessed.
This is a bold claim to suggest that these are intrinsic to men. Also, we're just having a lot of fun with language today, aren't we? You can harness unbridled ambition? So you can control something uncontrollable. That just does sound a whole lot like bridled ambition, Allie. And the idea that men are inherently violent and aggressive is silly, and that does contribute to toxic masculinity. Yes, all people are capable of violence and are capable of aggression, And that's not always a bad thing, but here's a neat little thing about humans. I don't know if you know this. We do control our emotions. My main issue is with her use of the word harness, as though it is something we cannot hold back. So we have to find the appropriate target to direct that energy at. There's not a whole bunch of Incredible Hulks running around out there. People get angry, they acknowledge that they got angry, and they move on.
The same masculine traits that bring destruction also defeat tyranny.
This is highly reductive. It's not simple aggression that either creates tyranny or destroys tyranny. The DNA of politics isn't raw emotions. A lot of it is coldly calculated and unemotional. And even the emotions aren't solely aggressive, and they're not solely aggression. They're using charisma, appealing to people's loves, and using their fears against them. Tyranny and the destruction of tyranny isn't something that happens only on the battlefield. Also, are we forgetting about propagandists and political scientists on both sides of tyranny that never fought a single battle?
The traits that foster greed also build economies.
Economies aren't built by greed, just the mass accumulation of wealth is. There have always been economies since the rise of civilization and the dawn of man. The sharing of resources is something that social animals do, and we've always found ways of trading. And for many cultures and civilizations, they've been more or less equitable, and more equitable than under capitalism.
The traits that drive men to take foolish risks also drive men to take heroic risks.
Risk-taking? Not a toxic trait! No one's shouting at stuntmen that they're toxic by virtue of being stuntmen. No one's calling Tony Hawk toxic. Who's calling Tony Hawk toxic, Allie? No one!
The answer to toxic masculinity isn't less masculinity. It's better masculinity.
Agreed.
It's a young man opening the door for a girl on their first date.
Basic politeness, not really masculinity.
It's a father working long hours to provide for his family.
That's capitalism forcing people into long hours instead of reasonable hours, not masculinity. Also, work is not masculine. Women also need money. You were at work when you made this video, Allie. Paying bills isn't an example of masculinity, toxic or positive, but an adult responsibility.
It's a soldier risking his life to defend his country.
Again, capitalism. And we can talk about the military-industrial complex in another video, but real quick, the intersection of colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism forces this job to exist. And it feeds working class people into these needless, life-threatening situations.
The growing problem in today's society isn't that men are too masculine.
Agreed.
It's that they're not masculine enough.
This is an easy argument for her to make, because she has not at any point defined masculinity. And let me be clear, nothing is wrong with masculinity. Just as masculinity isn't inherently bad, it's not inherently good. It is a neutral descriptor.
When men embrace their masculinity in a way that is healthy and productive, they are leaders, warriors, and heroes.
I love the masculinity levels chart that she's showing there. See, her point isn't bad. If someone embraces aspects of themselves in a healthy way, they are in fact a positive influence to the world. But it's where she's going with it that gives me pause.
When they deny their masculinity, they run away from responsibilities, leaving destruction and despair in their wake.
This is a weird all-or-nothing approach that really does not hold up to scrutiny. Yes, masculinity can be positive, but it's not the only way of being positive or healthy. Let's take a minute to think about masculinity and what it is, and how amorphous it is. What is masculinity? It's attitudes and behaviors expected of or associated with men and masculine people. And we can come up with traits all day, and nearly all of them could also be ascribed to women and feminine people. Bravery, sure, men are expected to be brave, but we wouldn't call a woman who runs into a house fire to rescue her baby masculine, would we? She talks about soldiers. Francis Clayton joined up in the Union Army disguised as a man, like Mulan. Lyudmila Pavlichenko, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, killed 309 fascists in World War II, and she wasn't an outlier in any way besides her kill count. There were 2,000 female Soviet snipers, so the idea that only masculinity is positive really holds no water to me. Positive actions and traits are positive. Kind of like how good people are good and bad people are bad. So what destruction is left in the wake of masculinity?
The consequences can be seen everywhere. 1 in 4 fathers now lives apart from his children.
This is the only example she does give. She goes on a list of the consequences of this. Children growing up without a dad are generally more depressed. There's a higher risk of incarceration, teen pregnancy, of poverty, and 71% of high school dropouts have no father. Now, I don't intend to argue with her stats. They might be right, but let's talk about correlation and causation. I don't see any evidence or logic to the idea that 1 in 4 men just aren't masculine enough to be parents. Incarceration, death, disease, addiction, mental illness, and something as simple as divorce can lead to parents not being present. And these statistics, they're also associated with poverty. Being poor isn't feminine, it's a lack of money, not masculinity. Many of these listed outcomes might be associated with a lack of a father, but not caused by the absence of a father. That's like saying eating ramen 5 nights a week makes you poor, or buying too much toilet paper causes a pandemic. She goes on to quote an Obama speech, but I'm certainly not interested in that, and something tells me PragerU isn't interested in Obama either. He calls out absentee fathers, but not the root cause of their absence.
The current trend is to feminize young men in the hopes of achieving some utopian notion of equality and peace.
I'm excited for this one.
We tell young men that their intrinsic desire to compete is wrong. Everybody gets a trophy. Don't run up the score.
It's participation trophies again. And we're also just not allowed to be poor sportsmen in a high school football game. She also listed dodgeball being banned and kids getting in trouble in class. So football games still have a clearly defined winner and loser, even if you can't dunk on the other kids. The competition isn't stifled in any way. It's that the kids are still growing athletes, and clowning on them isn't necessarily going to contribute to any sort of positive growth. But rewarding their efforts will. They still might have played a poor season, and they're going to be well aware of that, but it's not going to hurt them to give them a token of their effort. Dodgeball might not be played in elementary school because kids getting hurt just is not a super cool look, but a lot of high schools still play it. Mine did, and it really was never a gender-divided game. We never separated into boys and girls. We pelted all of the genders. So the gender argument doesn't hold water. And can I just go ahead and point out that PragerU is insisting we're trying to feminize boys, but apparently we are also doing the opposite.
Testosterone is easily obtained by today's teens.
Here's a secret that every woman knows. Women want real men.
Not lesbians, Allie.
I don't know any woman at any age who is attracted to a passive man who looks to her to be his provider, protector, and leader.
So there needs to be a defined leader in the relationship? I'm almost certain that is just not true. And yes, I'm aware that many women like the whole traditional gender roles thing, and that's fine, I don't care. But Allie, my best friend, you understand that relationships come in many different shapes, right?
Passive men don't defend, protect, or provide. Passive men don't lead. Passive men don't do the things we have always needed men to do for society to thrive.
Is this a video on passivity or on masculinity? This is a separate subject conflated into an argument about masculinity. But I'm sure you'll have a source's side on this, and I bet it won't be misleading.
In his book, The Abolition of Man, English social philosopher C.S. Lewis writes about this problem.
Oh, so you are going to be misleading tonight. All right, Allie. I know why you chose this book, and it's the name of the book. And The Abolition of Man, by the way, is a series of 3 lectures about values and man's power over nature, as well as some arguments about education. And the section she was citing was Lewis critiquing a textbook. It's not about masculinity at all. It's about philosophy, and not the philosophy of gender.
And in a world of wickedness, weak men are nothing more than enablers of wicked men.
Sure, that's all well and good, but now this is an argument about strength and not about masculinity. These arguments conflate masculinity with being active and strong, and the lack of it, or femininity, as weakness and passiveness, which is not an argument she has been able to reasonably support. And the only citation she has about masculinity was a philosophical treatise on pedagogy and mastery over nature. and somehow she thinks this proves her thesis.
It's not masculinity that's toxic. It's the lack of it.
At no point in this loosely connected string of words and ideas did she prove or support her thesis that the lack of masculinity is toxic.
I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
Nor did she do the job of speaking to positive masculinity, a very real thing. She didn't speak to fathers nurturing their children, friends supporting each other, a man protecting a distressed person from attack. She didn't talk about the camaraderie of a young man staying up to talk shit with his friends, where the guy's buying drinks for his friend when he's feeling down, or the captain of the hockey team hyping up the players. Where even are the dudes having fun moshing in the pit? And by leaving all of this out, she had the luxury of not speaking to toxic masculinity. And when she did, she only brought up the universally reviled crimes of rape, murder, and war, and never touched on the more subtle but still nefarious elements of toxic masculinity. Elements such as suppression and repression of emotions, insensitivity, the expectations placed on other men of 24/7 stoicism, an expectation of unfaltering physical and mental strength. No mention of queer phobia, no mention of sexism. She never talked about abuse or any other forms of bigotry. Not one word spoken about addictions or any other mental health problems. The absence of any discussion of masculinity in this video about masculinity makes it easy to brush off real discussions of masculinity, because all she did was equate masculinity with morality and responsibility, when there is a real discussion to be had that deserves more nuance than this. The fact is, toxic masculinity is damaging not only to society, but to the self-esteem of young men, because there's always the chance they are not masculine enough. They get caught up in the performance of masculinity and do not get to thrive as a fully realized individual because there's that little voice in the back of their head holding them back. I had fun dunking on Prager University, but watching any video by them is spiritually draining. Thank you as always to Edge for editing this video and making me look good, cool, and smart. Hopefully you added in some muscles. Shout out to Terrible Broseph and his band Catch Hell. I got a little sneak preview of his new album, and that shit rules. It's coming out on October 30th. Commie Trucker's podcast, The Precariat, also rules. Real interesting interviews all over it. It's always fascinating to learn about all these different folks on there. Links to these projects are in the description, as well as to our TikTok pages. Give me all of your likes, give me all of your comments, and please shower me with power. Shower me with power. Your clicks, your likes, your shares give me power and strength that I need to survive in this world. Thank you, and I'll catch you next time on the SJLA.